Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today we will have part 2 of our interview with Very Worshipful Brother Clayton LaVigne.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Today on the Working Tools Podcast, we have our usual group of hosts. We have Worshipful Brother Stephen Chung from Prince Charles 153 in Kelowna, British Columbia. Worshipful Brother Jarrod Dunham from Penticton 147 in Penticton, British Columbia. Very Worshipful Brother David Colbeth, who's in King Solomon Lodge number 60 in Auburn, Washington. And I'm Matt Appel, and I'm a member of Mill Creek 243. And we meet in Montlake Terrace, Washington. And again, we have our special guest with us, Very Worshipful Brother Clayton LaVigne, who is the Assistant Grand Secretary for Washington and a member of Tenino 86. Did I get this time? Hey, I remembered.
You got it right.
And a couple other lodges in the South Sound area. So Clayton, we had talked in our last episode about your analogy of the schools and the different programs of the schools and different sort of levels of schooling that
Sure.
we were comparing Masonry to. One of the other analogies you used in your emails or metaphors in your emails was about happy days and the progress of some generations of brothers through Masonry. I guess A, am I remembering that correctly? And two, what exactly was your metaphor and where are we?
Well, I just threw the Happy Days era out there because that was the era, of the 50s when the membership of our fraternity was at its peak, late 1950s, early 1960s, where we had lodges, like Centrae had 400 members, and we had some lodges up in your area that had over 1,000 members. Back then, from what the guys had told me, back when I joined in '96, there were still many past masters from that era that said that, they were doing degree work. It was just, it had gotten to the point to where they weren't doing really anything else. They had no need to do anything else because they were so busy doing degree work. And so a lot of the things that was discussed, in this book and also in this podcast, it didn't really occur. They got the lectures through, they barreled through them, got the degree work done. The next meeting, the next week, boom, boom, boom. It was almost like an assembly line from what some of the guys used as an analogy. And now that the degree work had died down, by the time I joined in the mid '90s, the degree work was occasional instead of constant. And so what do we do during the meetings? Well, basic business, old business, new business. Any education? Well, I headed down to the library to get the education because I wasn't getting it in the lodge. And there was a lot of my peers that dropped off, demitted, dropped NPD. And so there's not too many that are my age back from the '90s that are still active today. I think, frankly, that we've gotten a lot better in that regard over the last decade in bringing education back into our meetings. But there was a while there where there was this dip. So I don't remember how.
Why do you think there was that dip? Why do you think those guys dropped off?
Because there was nothing there for them. So when I joined, I was in my early 20s. And so the next generation up was in their 50s and 60s. So there was that generation gap. So there's the guys that were from the 50s and 60s, the sock op era, the Happy Days era, like I was saying. Well, I can't relate to that. I wasn't born yet. I was a 1980s kid. Then Huey Lewis in the news, techno pop and all that kind of stuff, as opposed to sock ops. And so there was that kind of that culture gap. There was nothing to really link my generation with what those guys do and what their interests were. So they were left trying to find something else. But the reason why I stayed with the lodge behind me is that I knew these guys. They'd known me since I was a kid. So I was in the lodge with a bunch of grandpas and uncles. And I don't mean that as literally. It's like I had 8 grandfathers and 16 uncles. They were my family. I grew up with them. So that's what really kept me in Tenino Lodge. And then as I learned personal lessons from them, like I would learn from my actual grandfather and did, that I was able to move those. So when these new guys showed up there, I was able to, hand that knowledge down as those brothers passed away of old age. And I was able to carry that baton.
So it was the fraternal aspect that you were experiencing that kept you there.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And of course, throughout that process, you did learn, like you say, you learned from them. And so, I think that's a common thing these days, is that the fraternal aspect seems to be what keeps some of these guys there. And, when we look at some of the older generation that's around our district now, I think that's what's keeping them there is, this is their social network. This is their fraternity. These are their brothers. They're not necessarily there seeking the education like the new guys are coming in, right? But it is really cool because those guys know a lot of the traditions and history and whatnot from our district that they're able to pass down. It just needs somebody to draw it out of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes it takes a little more ingenuity to do that. Like Jarrod is now the education officer down for his lodge, and you can understand the challenges in trying to find the right education pieces and deliver them where everybody's engaged, right? And sometimes it's a real challenge to get the older guys to engage in the education factor.
Mm-hmm. Although a lot of them have since passed because they were, the World War II generation when I joined, just like my actual grandfather. And so some of these guys are a little bit more into the education factor because they had joined more recently, or they came in from another area that was more education oriented. So the Happy Days era is and I don't want to say yay, it's gone, but it's another era. It's a different time period in our history, and it's not necessarily compatible with what we have today.
I now now that I know Jarrod is his lodge's education officer, I have a mental picture of Jarrod going, "I will not be ignored, worshipful master." Bringing
come on, it's hard to ignore me.
So I find myself wondering, and I've heard this conversation before, and I've no doubt that it's correct. And since we can't come up with an alternative Marvel style timeline, we'll never know. But do we think that if lodges had been more deliberate about education in the years leading up to the heyday in the 40s and 50s, or not the heyday, but the peak in membership, and we had maybe we'd have twice as many lodges or three times as many lodges as we do now in order to support all those members, and that, do we think that would have assisted in reducing the subsequent dip in membership? I mean, some of it's societal. People aren't joining churches anymore either, and that sort of thing. So I'm not. It's not all on us. But do we think that would have helped to abate that?
I do, Jarrod.
I was going to say, I can pretty much guarantee you that if we were more education focused back then, the way we want to be now, we wouldn't have had the big jump in membership that we have. That the post, as I've said before on the podcast, and once again, we'll say it again, the worst thing to ever happen to Freemasonry was the jump in membership in the 1940s and 50s. Because they've shown is that most of the people were joining for the fraternalism, not for anything else. And I think if the lodges were more education based back then, I think that the membership would not have grown as much. But we also know that we've come across the papers where they were complaining about the lack of education at the turn of the 20th century as well. So chicken egg, maybe. But I'm going to put out there that if we were more education based back in after post World War II, that there would not have been the spike in membership that we got.
Now that I think about it more, as I try to think before opening my app, but a lot of times it doesn't happen. I wonder if with the what you want to call them. So there was the World War II generation, and then there was the Vietnam generation, the hippies or whatever, the late 60s through the 70s era, where it seemed like a lot of people were searching for a spiritual connection. I wonder if Masonry had been better prepared to offer that, if there would have been, again, less of a peak, and as Jarrod was just saying, but less of a valley as well.
Yeah, I often wonder if we had kept up that education and kept up the mysteries, if you will, and not just the degree mill. I've talked to some of the older guys too before they passed, and had often wondered, what do they do? How do they do? And that's where, when I hear of a lodge doing degree work on their stated meeting nights, I think, oh, they're still a 1960s lodge. They haven't come out of that era in some regard. Because if the only thing you're doing on a stated meeting night is degree work, and you don't have education, if you don't have something else going on, if it's not a meaningful meeting besides degree work, then what are you doing on when you don't have a degree in your meeting, right? I mean, if I could see now, I know some lodges have multiple meetings a month, and so I could maybe see that on a stated meeting night they might have a degree in place of some other business or something. But I know of lodges that only have one a month or less, and they do them on their degree nights or on their stated meeting nights. And I think, wow, that's what else. I guess, if that's all you're getting together for, now maybe they're doing stuff in between, other educational things in between that are non-stated. That would be okay with me as well, if you're doing study groups and things like that. But if you're only getting together for a degree, and then what? Then the guys, you just have to figure it out on your own. I don't know.
They're like my lodge in Centralia meets once a month, like what you're saying. And there was a period of time there where they were doing exactly what you're saying. They were cramming the degrees onto and it's like, guys, you got 3 other weeks here, that you're not doing anything. So why are we cramming everything all the way onto this 4th week? And and then what happened was, now this is in the past, that the guys are saying, you know what? I just want to get home. The hour is late. I just want to get home. So the fellowship, so when the lodge started getting into the pattern to where you cram it all into one night, and then you split as soon as the final gavel drops, the attendance dropped and the lodge started struggling. But as soon as you have a worshipful master or a crew that's in there that says, hey, let's spread this out a little bit, do degrees on specials, do some more education, and then have some more fellowship after the meeting, the attendance started going back up. And there was this notable pattern. And so our lodge is now starting to see that pattern. Actually, both of my lodges are seeing the pattern, and they're both benefiting from it as we speak today. And I don't see that deviating anytime soon, which is very encouraging.
That's a question I had thought about asking was, for your lodges, do you have a supper before or a fellowship afterwards, or how does that work?
So both my lodge. No, I'm a member of a third one that's also very successful, but I can't visit it too often because I work too far away from it. But with Tenino and Centralia, we do have nice dinners ahead of time. Both lodges, the dinners precede the meetings. Again, with Tenino, it's more rural, so it's not as sit down formalish as it is with Centralia. But the effect is the same. You have that breaking bread ahead of time. The atmosphere is cool. Then we, move upstairs or across and hold our meetings. But then afterwards, oftentimes we're kicking back and just kind of having a jovial discussion, kind of like I'm having right here. And then we head home as we head home. Some of us leave early because we got to get up early the next morning. And we have some, they'll head over to a local bar or whatever, and they'll stay there till 1, 2 in the morning. That's their call. I'm not one of those guys, obviously, but the options are there, and it works. Those guys are staying active, so I'm all in favor of whatever works.
Do you think it's strictly social, or are they discussing somewhat Masonic ideas or lodge things they can do better, or is it just a couple of guys hanging out and talking about their day?
I don't know what afterward. Well, there's a little bit of that, but a lot of that has to do with, hey, which way, a lot of it's productive this is working, kind of like a medium long range plan. Sorry about that, Dave. the long range plan thing, but that, they say, hey, this meeting's pretty cool. Hey, did you guys think about this idea? And then they band, brainstorming sessions. A lot of that happens after the meeting.
Yeah.
You hear that amongst some of the guys, the younger guys too, which is pretty cool.
Clayton and I run the long range planning committee together. That's why that was an inside joke. But
actually, we both shared it at one point.
Yeah. So interesting, Matt. I saw you were gonna say something. Go ahead. Sorry. No. Sorry. I saw you on mute.
Certainly nothing that is erudite or learned at all. So I just have a dumb question, Clayton. How long have you been a Mason? I don't even know.
I joined March in 1996. I was 21 when I joined. So that'd be what? 27 years.
Wow. So was that basically as early as you could join then? I know they changed that not too long ago.
Well, it changed to 18 in our jurisdiction about 1993, and I was 19. So technically I could have joined as early as 1993. But I was still in college and I really wanted to focus on my academics at that point. And
Sure.
Then I got a job established. Then when I got everything established, then I joined. That way I could focus on getting my degree work done properly. And yeah, the guys were waiting for me and they were patient. Which is cool. It was really cool.
They didn't have to be too patient, only a couple of years. Yeah. So did you join mainly because of the family connection then, or?
Yeah. My great uncle was a police officer in Tenino, and then his nephew, my uncle, he joined back in 1983, and so, his neighbor was a Pearl Harbor survivor from World War II, and CJ had known me since I was a kid. He conducted me in the degrees, and then some of the other guys, the owners of the local pharmacy, had known me since I was a kid too. It was really an honor to be able to have these guys confer a degree. And that's another thing that kept me, because I'd known these guys for so long. So it wasn't like a bunch of strangers from another generation to where I couldn't. They were a different generation, different culture, but I'd known them. They were family to me. So it made things a lot easier. They weren't strangers. So like with Centralia, I visited Centralia from time to time when I was, in my early 20s, when I was, member of Tenino, but I never had that. It took a few years for me to finally get to know those guys. And then I was able to fit in with that lodge better too. And then I eventually joined it.
Well, that's great. That's 27 years. It's a long time. And, over the years, you've definitely seen some evolutions in the three lodges that you're involved with, I'm sure. But it does go to show, I believe, that, through the conversation, that if we can put the effort into having some sort of structured education program in your lodges, so that it's more than just a meeting, that's going to give the meat that some guys are looking for. And, on the other hand, we have to also temper that with not making it excessively long, so that the guys who are there for that fraternal aspect, aren't nodding off in the sidelines, right? And actually contributing instead, right? So I think that it's been a great review of the work, and I do really want to thank you for making the time to send us the information or the email and the correspondence on it, because it's like everything else we say in lodge, it's not about finding the time, it's about making the time, and that made it a quality experience, and I'm really glad you did that. Thanks, Clayton.
Thank you for having me. It's fun.
Well, I want to yap before I say goodbye, but I do want to say, I feel sometimes like as Masons, and I do this all the time, I'm certainly not pointing the finger at anyone other than myself, that we sometimes make a distinction between fraternalism and the self-improvement-y, I hesitate to say esoteric, but the work part of Masonry, if you will, that does not always exist. Sometimes working on yourself and talking with each other about that leads to the fraternalism part, and vice versa, the getting to know someone socially and knowing where they're coming from and what their background is and that sort of thing makes it easier sometimes to discuss what it is you're doing to improve yourself and that sort of thing. So I think they're not exclusive necessarily. It's not like we all go into a room and sit there and then walk away kind of thing. They go hand in hand to some degree. So.
Yeah. And those meetings at the pub after, they're solving all of Masonry's problems there.
That's
Guarantee
exactly right.
it.
That's
Right?
exactly right. Yeah.
I remember those meetings, those later night meetings, before zero tolerance came in. We used to solve all the problems at those meetings. Right?
Just like we have on this podcast.
That's right. Right.
Yeah.
So with that, sorry, David. Nope. I guess we're approaching the end of our second episode here with Clayton. So I want to echo what Steve said. Thank you, Clayton, for your input and your thoughts on our incessant yammering. So thank you very much for that. And just as importantly, thank you for agreeing to be here. We appreciate you coming on the show and talking to us and giving a slightly different opinion, someone to counterbalance Jarrod.
It's the way you want to look at it, but no, that's good. I thank you guys for having me on the show. I'll continue to. I'll download this episode, and scream at myself for thinking, "Good God, did I say that?" Or something. Like way home.
Well, you probably not to pull the curtain back too far, but you'll probably have a couple of weeks before you can listen to it. But yeah,
good. No, that's exactly cool. So, guys, thanks you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, and on behalf of Stephen and Jarrod and David and myself, and I'll say it, and on behalf of Clayton as well, thank you all for listening to the Working Tools podcast, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Goodbye.